Welcome everyone to the second day of AltaVita Symposium on Unlocking Opportunities in Corporate Housing. My name is Karolina Saviova and I am the co-founder and COO of AltaVita. I'm honored to introduce today's session, which comes very timely and will hopefully bring a positive note to the current challenging environment. Service apartments are the most attractive hospitality asset class of the moment. As such, I couldn't be more excited to welcome our esteemed panel of speakers, including global mobility experts and real estate investors. Together, they will discuss the latest trends and unique opportunities created by the global pandemic. The panel session will be followed by an exciting fireside chat with Laura Bain, the Vice President of Technology Solutions at AIRINC. The topics will be covering data technology as well as integrations to effectively manage remote workforce, so stay tuned. As I can see already, we have plenty of global mobility experts or service apartment operators and property managers in the audience. So really, feel free to actively participate throughout our live chat function and share your experience and just say hi to us. We welcome any input and we really want this session to be interactive and actionable. Well, I hope you all enjoy this session, which will be hosted by my amazing partner and AltaVita CEO and co-founder, Vivi Chayadi. Over to you, Vivi.
Well, thank you so much, my fabulous partner in crime. Today, we have a rare opportunity to host two real estate investors and two global mobility experts in the same room. Without further ado, I'd like to bring in our global mobility experts, Patricia Tavares of Brazil Talks and Miguel Tosoni of Cartus. Welcome, Miguel and Patricia.
Hi, guys. Hi. Thank you,
Vivi. Hi.
Really nice to see you both. Well, let's now bring in the real estate investors who are actually also AltaVita investors. Sonny Kalsi from Bentel Green Oak and Lawrence Manthe from Makuria Investment Management. Hi, Sonny and Lawrence. Hi. Well, welcome to AltaVita Symposium Day 2. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I'm so grateful and honored to moderate this session. And before we start, I'd really like to ask everyone to please leave your comments, questions, thoughts. As Carolina said before, we'd like this session to be as interactive as possible. So let's now start with a brief introduction of our panelists. Tell the audience where in the world are you dialing from, starting maybe with Sonny, Lawrence, Patricia, and Miguel.
Okay, hello. I'll say good morning. I think it's still morning here. Morning, everyone. I'm in New York City, which is pretty quiet New York City, but I'm in New York City. I'm the CEO of Bentel Green Oak, which is a global real estate asset manager. We manage about $50 billion US of real estate globally. And I'm actually personally an investor in AltaVita and have been for a number of years now. So thank you for having me today.
Hi, everyone. This is Lawrence Manthe. I'm one of the partners of Makuria Investment Management, and we're a London-based investment management company. We invest in all sorts of assets and companies, but I lead our real estate efforts, which is everything from the equity side to the credit side. And I'm also an investor in AltaVita.
Yay. Patricia and Miguel.
Okay. First, thanks for the invite, Vivi, to be here with you. It's a pleasure. I am currently the co-founder of Brazil Talks, which is a platform to increase the knowledge of the global mobility community here in Brazil, as I am based in Brazil. I work in São Paulo, but I live in Curitiba, so I am a typical commuter before the pandemic, right? Between Curitiba and São Paulo. I am also the head for global mobility in the Americas for Unilever.
Last but not least, Miguel.
Hi, thanks. And I echo Patricia. Thank you, Vivi, for the invitation. So glad to be here. I am Miguel Tosoni. I'm the newish Nike supplier account manager with Cartus. I am a Cartus employee. I am right now. I'm dialing in from North Miami. I'm just outside of Miami on the same east coast as Sunny. Just as my role implies, or my title rather implies, I oversee the Nike partnerships, from the different lanes and the supply chain for the mobility team, with the rigors of the Cartus supply chain.
Well, thank you so much for this. So let's dive right into our topic today, real estate opportunities driven by global mobility. Patricia, if we could start with you, please. In our audience, we have many service apartment and short-term rental operators who may not be familiar with the concept of global mobility. Could you tell us what is global mobility and why is it so important for multinational companies?
Okay, I can. So interesting question, because people say, what exactly does global mobility mean, right? So global mobility is a tool used within human resources in the companies where we can move our talents from one country to the other. Right. We also have the role of global mobility that works not only with talent, but works also with developing future talents. So it is an international opportunity that we offer to our talent team to make sure that you can learn, go around. So you have the opportunity of learning about your company in other countries. You have the opportunity of having intercultural experiences in different countries. And also, if you are married and have a family, that giving that opportunity to your family. So everybody says, but what exactly do you do? Do you just move them? No, we take care of them from end to end. Right? So we start with the talent strategy within the company. We discuss if this person is ready, is not ready. Is it time for it to go abroad or not? Mm-hmm. What is the type of assignment? Should this person go on a long term, on a short term, or should maybe just move for 6 months and then come back as a developmental program? After we take that decision on the talent side, we go into what is the strict global mobility, let's say. So immigration services that have to be done so that the assignee can move. Tax services have to be taken care of to make sure that he is tax compliant in his home country and in his host country. Mm-hmm. Internally, we have to make sure that he has all the international benefits that are offered. Payroll to make sure that he gets paid his salary the first month he is there, because sometimes it happens that they don't, and then they come on top of us. Right. And then we also have the physical move. So surveying their things, their household goods, what is going to be moved, how is it going to be moved, when is it going to arrive, all that part of household goods. And last but not least, the temporary accommodation once he moves. Right. Mm-hmm. So he is moving to a new place. He might have had a pre-visit with an orientation trip where he could learn where he was going to, the city he's going to be living in, but not necessarily enough time to find a place to live in. So they normally get 30 to 60 days, depending on the company, of a temporary accommodation, in some places called service apartments, where they can then start their life, right? So once they're installed in the temporary accommodation, they know they don't have to worry about anything for those 30 days. They can, yes, start on their job and at the same time look for a permanent housing. So quick summary, because I know I don't have that much time, but just wanted to pinpoint everything that global mobility does.
Thank you so much, Patricia, particularly mentioning about temporary housing, corporate housing, which is very relevant to Miguel. Miguel, you have such a wealth of experience in both corporate housing and now the supply chain manager for Nike, beautiful brand, which is one of my favorite. Can you tell us are there any recent trends that you are seeing nowadays, and how do things like employee experience and duty of care really impact corporate housing decisions, knowing that there is so much going on for the assignees?
Yeah, a great question, and I'd like to kind of answer the question through, let's say, my last decade in the industry, right? So a lot has changed in the last 10 years. For starters, when I came into the mobility space, Oakwood was, the dominant player, right? I mean, Oakwood was in the industry for 60 years. It was a concept, developed by Howard Ruby, a person that was larger than life in the industry. For anybody, I'm sure in the audience that met him. So when I was tasked to open Latin America as a region in 2013, was really like the last, let's say, region to create this global footprint, for Oakwood. Which, I mean, think about this, Vivi, right? From your perspective, it was a company that had 48 district offices around the U.S. It had, a massive service center in Phoenix. Buildings in London to cover EMEA, obviously a big portfolio in Asia, and then now Latin America, as I said. So that global solution that Oakwood was now, let's say, is absorbed, right, by our friends at WellWorks Living. And I would venture to say, pretty similar technology and pretty similar footprint, right, and offerings. Now, the product within that offering has changed, right, in the last 10 years. And now people have access to cool concepts like an Alto Vita, right, that has a pretty unique perspective, or let's say focus on delivering, a more unique inventory style, right? Something that is not so boxy, let's say. And quite honestly, that's what attracted me to then join Oasis Collections, not to be confused with Oasis Corporate Housing, because they had that unique inventory. It was pretty cool that they pay attention to the design. Now, that unique inventory, getting into your question, comes with a unique set of challenges, right? I mean, we can say that it's easier to assess risk in a building, right? Standalone building, but it's a lot harder, difficult to assess 100 or 150 apartments in a city like DF in Mexico City, or Barcelona, right? Or in Rio, or Barcelona specifically after the terrorist attacks, right? Which kind of brings me to my opinion, specifically to duty of care. I believe that duty of care has some standards, rigors, right? We assess evacuation protocols a certain way. We want to know how do people can escape a building if it happens, right? And then, but those protocols are pretty standard. Like I remember, working with corporate security teams for a Dutch oil and gas company, assessing risk in Rio. Fun stuff like in the Olympics, right? How do you really assess the risk for these companies? And then there's the area assessment, right? You want to make sure that they're an area. But what I'm getting to all of this, these are risks that we have data that we can say, we know how to measure the health and the safety of a building. We know how to look and assess an area, but how we really assess and prepare for the unknown, right? I go back to the Barcelona. Barcelona was not a high risk market when the terrorist attacks happened. So people had to shift and change. Now we have, protests, civil unrests, now in places even like the US, right? That we at Nike are paying attention, right? Where are these things happening so we can again, make moves if we have to. And I hate to bring it up, but, now COVID in the mix, right? So, think of, where you were a year ago and what has happened in exactly a year, and it's still happening, very, very volatile. So, I don't know about you, but I did a lot of, let's say, soul searching during this pandemic, right? Triggered, honestly, by a furlough. And to me specifically, my priorities were recalibrated. I'm really looking more at experiences, right? I miss traveling. I really, truly do. So I think the workforce of the future, right, are gonna be somewhere in between of that. How do you assess providing a cool inventory and a good experience, but also mitigating risk? So I think our industry is going to have to be able to battle with both, right? To be able to, again, come up with cool inventory, cool options for these employees, or now more and more want to do that. I'm traveling to Orlando next week. I'm going to be there. I'm looking for a property with 3 rooms. I'm going with my significant other. We're working from home. We need the space. I have a dog. So I think we just have to keep our ears to the ground and see what happens in the next 12 to 24 months and continue to adjust.
Oh, that's super insightful. Thank you so much, Miguel.
Sure.
Sonny and Lawrence, having heard what Patricia and Miguel have said about corporate housing, duty of care, employee experience, so on and so on, I would like to understand what you are thinking about in terms of investment perspective, particularly from Sonny, and then perhaps from Lawrence, how realistic and feasible is operational execution of corporate housing real estate?
So do you want me to go first?
Yes, please. Thank you, Sonny.
I will. Well, it's interesting when Patricia was speaking. I spent 18 years working at Morgan Stanley, and I was relocated 4 times. And so everything you were talking about, I could totally relate to. To Europe, to Australia, to Hong Kong, and then Tokyo. Right, and so it was so much more than just moving your luggage.
Yeah.
So much more. Actually, 5 times, then back to the U.S. at the end of it all. So, look, I would say I think a couple of things are going on, right? I think COVID has been the great accelerator, right? So there are a lot of secular trends which were underway, and what COVID has done is significantly accelerated them by 5 years, 10 years more. And so I think the big thing that a lot of us as investors are trying to do right now is figure out which of those changes are secular and therefore permanent, and which have been cyclical and short term, right? So some of the things in my view, which I think are more short term, have been how travel has pulled way back, right? And therefore how that's impacted the hotel market. My view is that is more cyclical, and there will be a comeback on that at some point. Just like we saw in Asia after SARS, and I was living in Asia during SARS, so saw that firsthand. Some of it's secular though, and I think one of the things I think will be secular is I think companies are going to look for increasing flexibility around space, generally speaking, right? So we saw a huge trend with this, with co-working, the explosion of co-working in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, and obviously WeWork being the biggest example. And look, WeWork's got its challenges. Among them, it has its own specific challenges, but beyond that, just given right now, people would be really nervous about being in a big open plan office. That will all pass, right? And then I think what's going to be clear is companies are going to continue to want to lean on the flexibility that co-working gives them. I believe the same thing is going to be true from a residential perspective, right? That people are going to look for more flexibility. So whether it's the extreme of co-living where someone's actually signing a longer term lease and doing something and something like that, or just flexibility as it relates to tenants, employers, et cetera, looking for the ability to kind of have space which works for their employees, that works for their use, safe, clean, usable, and all that without a long-term commitment. I personally think that's part of the secular trend that was already happening pre-COVID, and I think COVID is just going to accelerate it. We just got to get through this time period we're in right now where people are probably appropriately so nervous about being too packed in a closed space together, being, but sanitation, cleanliness. I got to tell you, I'm so tired of hand sanitizer here in the office. It's everywhere. But this will pass, right? And then I think that trend that you all have been capitalizing on, Vivi, is going to be one that's going to accelerate.
Great. Well, I mean, speaking of flexibility of flexible assets, I think it would be great to hear Lawrence's thought on this, particularly when it comes to the execution, the operational execution.
Yeah, look, I think Sonny has mentioned some of the trends that have probably happened also prior to the crisis. But, if we take a step back, residential has actually fared reasonably well in this crisis. If you take the extremes, retail has gotten absolutely destroyed in this current crisis. And some assets values are down, anywhere 50 to 60%. And here in Europe, residential prices in a lot of instances are actually up because investors appreciate the stability of the cash flows and the, I suppose, heightened importance of the home in this particular crisis, and sort of the trend working from home is helping that as well. But picking up on something that Sonny said is that I think increasingly asset owners will have to think about how they're going to provide this flexibility and level of service to their tenants and what type of tools they're going to need to be able to execute that. So especially in the big cities like London and New York, where prices are high, how are they going to actually improve yields, improve rents, and generate outperformance? They're going to have to be more operators rather than just asset owners in the future. And they're going to need support by tools and service providers like yours to be able to do that. And so I think it's going to become increasingly important to use technology and use platforms to optimize your assets in the resi space as well, especially if you're trying to appeal to a global tenant that will expect the same quality in New York as he does in Sao Paulo, as he does in London. And I think that to achieve that, they're going to need these tools such as yours.
Thank you so much, Lawrence and Sonny. We've got some great questions from the audience, and I'd like to potentially bring one from Andrew. Hi, Andy. I think if we could, here it is. Question for both Sonny and Lawrence. Curious to know what percentage of your portfolio are committed to temporary housing space currently in the future, and why did you enter, if you did? Who would like to go first?
I would say probably across the board, it's probably 15 to 20%. It depends a little bit on how you define it, but my guess is that temporary housing, I guess, if we include anything that can be flexible and include various concepts in the future, I think that number will probably double over the next few years, if you ask me.
Right. Yeah, if I may, in terms of definition of temporary housing, it's essentially furnished, ready to move in. That doesn't require the assignees to buy furniture or call internet cable. and Sonny, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. We own some service departments buildings. We own obviously a lot of hotels. We own a ton of rental residential, but I would say, to Lorenz's point, I think not a lot of it is set up right now to be none of it was purpose built to be temporary housing. Yep. We've done some stuff with Sonder, where they've sublet a chunk of our units and furnished them and done that. We've also worked with another group in New York whose name is escaping me that does it for corporate housing. But what they do is they master lease the units for a year or two, and then they'll, furnish them, and basically they do them for their employees, right? So they'll do a subcontract for certain employees. So I would say a little bit like Lauren's, I think we have a lot of our portfolios capable of being used for that, but we haven't. Over the course of my career, we have owned a lot of service departments. So we did a lot with Oakwood in Asia when I was out there. We had a lot, and I think what we have found is, and whereas I believe that model is one that I think obviously, the big players, which Altovita is on the way of getting there, right? But big players like Airbnb, right? So one of my college friends was the COO at Airbnb for a number of years, and so I learned a lot about that business. And I think that this model is one where it just has this powerful ability to disrupt, right? And it has the powerful ability to unlock a lot of stuff which might not currently be set up to be used. The owner might not be thinking about it from the standpoint of temporary housing, but it's very easy to pivot to that, right? And I think it's one of the things that a lot of us are just going to have to think about is how much are we willing to look in the office business. We do it all the time. You've probably heard the term pre-build space. We'll pre-build space so it's easier to lease. And that means that a tenant can come in and turnkey. When we leave here, we're not tearing anything down. The person that's coming in after us is going to take over our space the way it is. To make their life easier. I think that is going to be a bigger opportunity for some of us as owners of residential as well.
Yeah,
but also if I could add one small point to that, is that the other opportunity that exists globally is that because the tenant base is a different one, it's not always a local one. There is sort of an arbitrage that exists between having space in, let's say, in London and in Berlin. So that same client might be willing to pay the same rent as he would be willing to pay in London, in Berlin, but in Berlin, the assets are actually much cheaper. So you can, one of the big opportunities in the secular shift is to identify these arbitrage points and actually create that product for the global market, but with local sort of asset prices.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting what you mentioned earlier about the assets being flexible and how we are literally unlocking opportunities in already established assets, making them temporary housing. Any real estate asset can be temporary housing, which actually, something that Carolina and I have been seeing in the past 3 years. When we started Altavita 3 years ago, the professionalized segment of sort of unique homes, as you mentioned earlier, Miguel, was very small, and we have been seeing them growing, and that's how we are able to leverage on a lot of unique homes as part of our portfolio. Well, moving on to our next topic, really, which is the difficulties in many different regions in sourcing temporary housing. Patricia, you have almost 10 years of experience in global mobility. So have you seen any specific challenges in particular regions where you need to really get hands-on and get dirty on really, helping your assignees settle in order for them to move their life?
Yes, so over 20 years of experience, Vivi, and I would say 10 years
20
in,
years.
yeah, I would say 10 years using,
I stand corrected.
Yeah, using more temporary accommodation than what we used to do before, right? I think one of the main challenges that we have is when we move out of the great centers. So when you're talking, like Lorenz was saying, Berlin, Sao Paulo, New York, Paris, whatever you are, you're in a normal situation in a normal city that would have temporary accommodation, even Airbnb, right? But when you go out into smaller cities and countries that are underdeveloped, that's where we start feeling the difficulties. So, for example, a company like Unilever has plants, and our plants are never in the capitals of these countries. We're always spread out into, not even in the suburbs. We're in the suburbs of the suburbs with the plants, right? So where do you find a temporary accommodation there? What happens? In many cases, what happens, for example, in the Caribbean, right? In the Caribbean, nobody wants to lease an apartment for a long period because they want short periods because of tourism. Right. So we have to normally rent apartments and put it together with rental furniture, whatever it is, to be able to form a serviced apartment there. So I think that is one of the difficulties also. And even that's speaking a little bit about LATAM. But even when we go into the US, when I was based there, we did also have plants out in the middle of nowhere. And we faced the same issues that we faced in an underdeveloped country. Right. I would say that out of the 5 regions that Unilever works more, the easiest region for you to find temporary accommodation in any kind of city is Europe, right? But if you go to Asia or if you go to Africa, Africa has the same problems as Latin America. Asia depends on which country or which place you're actually going to, right? And there is this big boom of the Airbnbs, but some of the companies don't let our assignees go into Airbnbs in other countries. For example, in DF, like Miguel said, in Mexico City, you don't know who the owner is. How do you pre-vet the owner of a temporary accommodation there? And you need to make sure that the owner is not a drug dealer or is not involved with any other kind of problems, right? Which is normal. It sounds strange when I say it so calmly, but that's very normal in Bogota and in Mexico City. So you have to be aware of these kind of vettings also for you to be able to say, assignee, you can go into that country, into that apartment for 30 days with no problems at all.
What are you seeing, Miguel? I will be curious to hear your thoughts. I have some thoughts as well. I'd love to share after you.
First of all, that comment about who is the owner gave me flashbacks, right? Of knowing, not really knowing it. It was the liability was real. So my answer is going to be a little bit different. So specifically for Nike and Cardis, like, first of all, I'm too new to really tell you, but I can say, given service levels and feedback, the network is performing well, right? So we don't have a lot of holes. Sure, can we have some one-offs? Like I think I mentioned to you, Vivi, right? Maybe in Moscow that we had somebody that went up for Airbnb, may have been somebody difficult. Maybe the product was really boring because I did some investigation. But so there's not a lot of holes. Wow. My question was really more about what is the demand is gonna look like, right? Post this storm that we're going through. And I can tell you, I'll speak a little bit about Nike now. So one of my early learnings through the onboarding process is that the big marketing machine that Nike is, that I personally love, that really trickles down to the workforce, right? They really believe in collaboration, inclusion, all the stuff that we see, it's true inside. So the hope, and by the way, this is public knowledge, right? The hope is really for the Nike workforce to go back to that environment. But nobody really knows, right? So we don't really know. And then we don't even know what it's going to look like in the future either. What do they want? There's a lot of buzz right now. And again, super ignorant, but about, remote working. What does that mean? It's easier intra-country. Like I said, I go into Orlando. I don't need a passport. So I don't want to diminish the complexities of crossing borders and I want to work out of Spain for the next 3 months because I'm from home, right? I'm working from home. And so suppliers like Oasis, again, not to plug them, but they have now a kind of like a membership model. This seems interesting to me, but very complex to do that really in reality, right? Can a Nike employee just pick up and go and work from anywhere, or Unilever? Probably not, So I think it's really going to be determined on what the next 12 to 24 months look like. But I do think that we have to be super attentive and focus on what are the trends, right? Again, I keep mentioning, we all talked about, we all want more space now because we're working from home, and we want to be able to, I'm very loud. My significant other's in another room. She's working there. So I think that's going to be, one to look for. And who knows, really,
I would be interested to hear thoughts from Sonny and Lawrence about in real estate investment in these rather difficult regions. And as I understand, back in maybe 70s or 80s or 90s, service apartment sector in Asia was booming simply because there were a lot of expats that were not able to find corporate housing or just standardized housing that they could trust and go. And therefore, a lot of these service apartment brands that you see nowadays are actually, they originated from Singapore. So Fraser, Oakwood, Ascot, Citadine, all of them are Singaporean brands because they saw the need or the demand, and they wanted to make sure the supply could catch up there. So what are your thoughts, Sonny, from an investment perspective to really invest in rather difficult markets, but where the demand is real? Patricia's executives do require some of these housing in the regions where she cannot source.
Yeah. Well, look, I think maybe for us, we're not a good example because I think most of our exposures are in the big developed markets. I mean, we do have some exposure in China and India. And it's hard to call China a developing market anymore, right? So, but having invested in a lot of those markets 20 years ago when they were really emerging, that's when we owned a lot of service departments because it was there's a huge amount of demand on the demand side for those. And I think the big challenge was always a service department's fine. I've lived in a half dozen service departments, and I was single in every one of them until the last one. It doesn't work very well when you have when you have a family, right? And I think that's one of the challenges. The business model doesn't work really for an owner of a service department complex to own bigger units because they're just not, there's just not as much demand for them. And so there is a very big opportunity in the market, in my view, to provide something that's vetted, that is, that a family can use, for example, or that if someone's going to be somewhere for a while, there's only so long you can handle. I've lived in an Oakwood, I've lived in a Fraser. There's only so long you can handle it, right?
Yeah.
So I do think, though, that it'll be. I'm curious to see how much purpose-built stuff there will be for that. Now, that being said, look at New York City right now, and apartment building occupancy has gone from 90% to 70% in 6 months, right? And as people start coming back, there might be a market opportunity, for example. So you don't have to go to São Paulo, right, to find that, right? There might be a market opportunity in some of these markets as people start coming back, easing them back in, if you will. And so I use that analogy here, but certainly look around the world in a bunch of places. But the big challenge is just like I've invested in Russia before. I'm not sure I'll do that again, but I've invested in Russia before. And the challenge in a lot of those markets is not just everything from a real estate perspective, but it's also just getting really comfortable that you can operate something and provide the level of quality, or that someone can operate it for you to provide the level of quality that a Nike would expect, right?
Yeah.
That a Unilever would expect, right? I think that is a big challenge.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts, Lawrence? We've got some questions here as well from the audience, and please keep them coming because we'll get to them.
Yeah, look, I think the first thing to mention from my perspective is always, is there rule of law, right? I mean, Russia was just mentioned. I think an investor's perspective is always, well, if I'm going to go into Brazil or, China, wherever you want to go, I want a return premium. And that's one way of trying to compensate for that. But if you don't have rule of law and if you can't have trust in the local jurisdiction, then ultimately you don't have any control, and that might be a real problem down the line. So that's always a major challenge in terms of those type of geographies. But then the other key issues from my perspective are always local limitations and culture and regulation, right? So there are so many local intricacies that you have to be familiar with to operate real estate, that you really need the expertise to be local from those people to be able to provide a good quality product. And I think to an extent that, again, going back to that earlier theme of having platform providers that can act as a tool for real estate owners to provide that, I think that's going to be of huge value, right? And you sort of, you saw some of that in Europe, let's say with the Eastern European countries, where there was that sort of divide for a while, and it's now normalizing with obviously those companies being, no longer really considered Eastern European countries, but more just part of core Europe. And I think, but at the beginning, having operators that sort of understand those type of risks on a local level was absolutely crucial. And I think it's probably the same with emerging markets.
Well, we have a lot of questions from the audience, so I'd like to pick one here. I think it's quite interesting. It's probably more suitable for Miguel and Patricia. Is it a trend for assignees to source their preferred or unique home property and then refer to relocation agents to place the booking? What are your thoughts, Miguel?
I will love Patricia actually to answer that first, and I'll give you my opinion.
Okay.
Ladies first.
Okay. Thank you. So what happens with the companies? Normally we have an RMC that has a local person on the ground that does the house search. What we do in the countries where we have security issues, for example, is all houses are vetted before being offered. So that you don't have to do any vetting, or let's say the assignee loves the house and then you do the vetting and you can't go into it, right? So we do it as a pre-work to make sure that everything is already prepared for the assignee. Booking is also done by the local DSP. So it's not done by the assignee or by the company itself.
And is that because of duty of care?
That is because of duty of care. Yes.
And Miguel, the lady is done.
Yeah, I would say it depends on the program. I mean, I'm going to give kind of a generic answer, right? It really all depends on the market, right? Are they trying to look for options in a developed place where probably a lot of those options will be presented, right? The obvious ones. If it's an educated market with a lot of tools, like in the US, that maybe they want to find their own properties, that happens. I'm actually now learning that. And obviously then, the complexity of the market in terms of security, civil unrest, and all of the above. So, which is why I think, we can't box it. It has to, I would like to see an array of options, and especially when you're talking about more than one human being transferred. Again, I go back to the example of Moscow. The options presented, again, my investigation was they're very kind of serviced apartment / apart hotel type, right? And not knowing the profile of that was probably not a good fit. So then, sure, that person they're probably gonna push. And if we have people like Sonny that are professionals at relocating, they know where to push. They know what are the key things to say. I don't feel safe in this apartment. That's it. All bets are off. You have to move this person to somewhere else. So it really all depends.
Well, I think Andy has some suggestion in terms of an answer here. Vetting platforms like Altavita, combined with real estate developers, can deliver consistent quality, not always available in Airbnb model. Thank you so much, Andy.
Totally agree with that.
So Jessica has a question.
Vivi, I have a question. Can I just ask Lawrence and
of course,
and Sony here? It came out of curiosity, out of everything that we're talking. I'm definitely not a real estate person, so I am really going to ask as a person that knows nothing. Okay. One of the difficulties that we have is when we bring people, for example, into New York, and they're coming from from Buenos Aires, let's say here in Argentina, where they live in big mansions, right? And then they have to go up to the Upper East there and live in a 2-bedroom apartment, right? I don't know if there is an opportunity or if there is something that can be done on having serviced houses and not serviced apartments, so that people could see maybe an apartment with a garden, I don't know, something like that, but so that people could feel that the apartments, they are service apartments, but they're not that small. And maybe, for example, when they're going for 6 months, like Sony said, it's awful to live if you have a family. If you're single, okay, but if you have a family that's going with you, even if it's just a partner, right? And you have to live 6 months in a 2-bedroom apartment, all closed up, after coming from, I don't know, let's say 10 years living in a big house in Buenos Aires. How is there an opportunity there to make bigger areas in cities like New York, where nothing?
You might need
big,
a big budget.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's another
garden.
I'm not sure
That's
how many mansions you're going to be able to source, but yeah. So
yeah.
if you find one, let me know.
Even my previous company, people would come from Hong Kong into New York, and they would also feel that, right? And it was like, I want to live in the Upper East, but I do not want to live in an apartment. And we were like, sorry, not much to do.
Look, the reality is it's the trade-off people make in New York and London and other places around the world, is location versus size, right? For lack of a better term, right? So, well, what I will say, one of the fastest growing areas of real estate in the U.S. since the financial crisis, and has been accelerated by COVID, is actually the rental of single-family homes. It's a business which got institutionalized by Blackstone, and they took a company public called Invitation Homes, which is massive. But there's a huge amount there. And I say that because that's not going to be in Manhattan. That's going to be 30 minutes away, 45 minutes away. But if someone wants a home, a full-size home, and actually a lot of these are the rentals, so you can get them furnished. There's not as many options yet, partly because of the scalability and the ability to manage them for the owners. But I do think that look, there's some of that out there, but I think it's the classic trade-off that people always have to make with these very dense urban centers, right? So spaces are just smaller.
But I would say that there's probably an opportunity there. It's not going to be massive, I think, for investors, but I think you've seen a generalized trend of people willing to sacrifice, that trade-off Sonny was talking about, and move out a little bit more for more space. And I think that creates an opening for people to create a more industrialized solution for people who are willing to make that trade-off. So once you have a general trend of that nature, you can probably build product around it and standardize it for that particular demand that you're expecting. So I don't see why it wouldn't be able for somebody to create a portfolio around that particular demand, which I'm sure is there for the long run.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, our investors. So we've got a question for Lawrence, I believe, from James, to Sonny's point on people coming back to New York. How do you feel Brexit will impact the return of UK UK nationals?
How much time do we have?
4 minutes.
Look, I think my perspective on that in short is that I think Brexit is going to impact London as a hub, as a European hub, but not necessarily as a global hub. So I think Europeans will have different options in the future of going to places like Berlin or Madrid or Barcelona. And I think some of the talent will go there. And I think that's, from my perspective, unfortunate, but an inevitable kind of result of Brexit. But London will, come out of this on the other side. And I think at the moment, rents are down and the attractiveness of London seems less so than it was maybe 1 or 2 years ago. But I think in terms of the very long term, I think London will continue to be a global hub and attraction for talent pools. So I wouldn't be too worried, but for the next 5 years, I think it's going to be a bit of a slow bleed, I would call it, for London.
I love it, absolutely. I think that maybe we could have just one last question from the audience before we have to finish off here. Please keep them coming. We will have a look at it. And I have just one last question for myself, to everyone. What do you think is the next game changer in your respective field? Who'd like to go first?
Look, from my perspective, I think real estate has been so far behind the technology trend, and I think it's just starting to really make use of different technologies to operate assets. And I think that is going to be absolutely crucial for real estate operators in the future. And I think some of it will be offensive, so you can use tools or technology to add value, and some of it will be defensive, where if you're not able to provide certain services and use technology in the right way, you will just be out of the game and you will underperform, and that's that. So I think the actual sort of technology catching up with real estate and being integrated with real estate is the real game changer that I think is going to make a difference in real estate over the next 10 years, let's say.
I agree 100% with Lorenz. I think, and we're early. I think we're very early in the disruption cycle for the real estate industry. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. And just back to what I said before, look, it takes human beings 100 days to form a habit. Many people have been working from home now for 200 days, right? So there have been a lot of habits that have been formed that I think will be hard to break. And so back to my point earlier about what's secular and what's cyclical, we have 1,300 employees. They're not going to all get to work from home forever, right? But I'm also 100% sure that we will have a lot more flexibility going forward in terms of what we are able to do and what technology allows us to do. I didn't know what Zoom was on March 12th, right? I'd never heard of it. Right?
March
so,
13th.
My God.
And I hadn't heard of StreamYard until today. So I just think that out of this is going to come a lot of sustained change.
And what are your thoughts, Miguel or Patricia?
Yeah, and this time we'll let Patricia go last and close it for all of us from her experience. I would echo what both Sonny, and Lauren said, but I think it's whoever finds that balance between providing, an experience for the employee while mitigating risk, right? I think that by definition, something that is zero risk is probably not that fun. So you want to have a little bit of fun in the experience, the proper inventory, but within the rigors, right, of taking care of our employees, right? That'll be number one. So I think it's that, finding that balance between the two worlds and being able to provide that solution for employees, which I think Altavita, it's part of that for sure. A little plug at the end, Vivi. Come on.
Thank you. Last but not least, Patricia.
Okay, so I have a view specifically in global mobility. People are asking, is global mobility going to end now because of the pandemic? No. Is global mobility going to end because of virtual assignments and because of remote working? No. Because of everything that I said right in the beginning, right? We have talent that has to be exported to the other countries. And talent is never going to stop. And you're never going to get unique talent only in one country. You're always going to have to share that talent. So I think global mobility will continue, maybe a little bit different, because we will move maybe towards a little bit. And I say maybe because nobody has this very much defined in the market yet. Towards virtual assignments. Remote workers have always existed. So people are talking about it as new, but it's something that has always existed, right? Even between countries or between states, like in the US, states are different with taxation. So it is almost like moving a country. I think one thing that we have to keep in mind, and that I always tell my team and everybody that asks me, is never forget that we're dealing with people with lives and with families. So never forget that you have human touch that you have to share with the assignee at any time and moment. And that considering a little bit of duty of care, considering a little bit of humanity, and considering our roles. We are dealing with people. And the last but not least message I like to give always is love what you do. Because if you love what you do, it becomes a career. And if you love global mobility like I love global mobility, it will definitely be a career and not just an hour job a day.
I love it. Thank you so much, our esteemed panelists, for the beautiful, insightful statements. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for all your support to make Altavita's first symposium currently almost a success. And up next, we have a fireside chat session with Laura Bain from AIRINC as she shares her insights on data, technology, and API integration. Stay tuned, and thank you again.
Welcome everyone to the 2020 Alta Vita Symposium Fireside Chat Session Day 2. Today, I am so delighted to have Laura Bain as my guest. She is the Vice President of Technology Solution at AIRINC. In today's session, we will discuss with Laura all the fun and juicy things about technology, GitHub, and API integration. Well, welcome, Laura, and I'm so pleased to have you today.
Thank you, Vivi. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Just for the benefit of our audience, would it be possible for you to just start introducing AIRINC briefly?
AIRINC in general, sure. AIRINC is the market leader in data and advice for globally mobile talent. We built a suite of solutions available on our web portal that clients can use to deploy talent quickly and strategically. And we also advise on policy and practice for all types of movements: domestic, international, temporary, and permanent. We have decades of experience and long client relationships that really enable us to partner with our clients and to help them navigate the growing complexity of today's domestic and global mobility programs.
Laura, how long have you been at AIRINC?
I have been at AIRINC for 30 years. And wow, that seems crazily long, but I'm not alone. We have a lot of employees, staff who really enjoy the work that we do, enjoy the company, and have been there, 20 plus years, which really brings us a depth of knowledge and experience to really help advise and partner with our clients. Yeah.
Amazing. And can you help just kind of explain what you are seeing recently as the latest trends? What is everyone talking about now in data and technology and global mobility?
Yeah, so there's lots of clients are working on getting their mobility platforms automated and integrated. That's a huge push, trying to get away from their bespoke systems that they built, or their Excel spreadsheets that they're using, and trying to improve efficiencies and kind of, really modernize their approach. And we're also getting a lot of requests for help on, this new drive for employees to want to work from anywhere. It's a new trend that COVID has brought on. We're all dealing with this pandemic, and the knowledge sector is really shifting, whether they want to or not, to more of a distributed work environment. And so employees are now rethinking, their expensive homes and the expensive cities, their work-life balance, their long commutes, and they're looking at moving to more rural communities where they can work remotely. And so how to deal with those requests, because there's a number of them coming in, the mobility and talent and immigration and compliance and tax all need to work together on these requests, legal. And so trying to come up with processes to handle those requests, make decisions on those requests, develop policies around those types of moves, and then how to communicate with employees and create a process that's streamlined and self-service and informational to them.
So how does the human-centric approach play into this sector where it's essentially moving people around the world? All of these technology solutions sounds great, but where does the employee experience come into play?
Right, so on two fronts. On the API integrations, AIRINC's been working since 2012 to build a suite of API integrations. What those do is first of all, for the global mobility teams, they take the manual effort out, right? So everything's streamlined, it pushes through data, and it takes a lot of steps away from that process so they can focus more on service to their employees. But it also enables them to have more information at their fingertips to provide more information to their employees. And the more information the employees have, the more transparency in the process, the more likely that their moves will be successful. So that's how that trend is pushing.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. I'd just like to conclude with, very short questions about you. I understand you love to dive and you also like to hike. So how high have you been and how deep in the ocean have you dived into?
Right, and I'm not a big climber, but I do enjoy good hikes. The highest one I think I've been to, which is also fun because it was in Morocco, was to the peak of Mount Toubkal. Mount Toubkal is in the High Atlas Mountains in Morocco. It's the highest peak in those mountains. It's just over 4,000 meters. The top is covered in snow and ice, so it's a little bit technical as you get up there. So that was a really fun hike that I did a number of years ago.
Did you have to use any particular technique to climb the icy part?
Well, yeah, you needed a little bit of elevation acclimation. There's a base camp about 3/4 of the way up where we slept, and then the first night, and then the second day we woke up early and we had crampons to your boots to hike in the ice. Wow. and an ice pick just in case, and did the peak using that equipment, and then hiked down the same day. So it was a two-day hike for us.
Wow. And what about the other side of the depth of the ocean?
Yeah. So I am an avid diver. It's a big passion of mine. I've dove in some really wonderful places around the world. I could go on and on, but the deepest, most technical dive I did was actually local. There's a German U-boat that was sunk during World War II in 1945 off the coast of Rhode Island, which is near where I live. And it sits upright and is almost completely intact. There's a torpedo hole in the deck of the vessel, so you can actually swim, or you used to be able to swim into it when you're diving. It's at 121 feet of water, or 37 meters. Wow. The water in New England is fairly dark down there, so you have to have special equipment. It was a mixed. I did a mixed oxygen dive, and you have to have light so you could see. But you just come across this peak of a bow in this kind of eerie water, and then you swim through it and you see the way that the German soldiers died in that wreck. And it was a little creepy, but it was also very interesting.
I wonder if they found secret Nazi treasure.
They did. There was a lot of Nazi memorabilia, plates, with a symbol, teacups and things like that. Unfortunately, there's been looting at the site, but they've tried to keep as much intact as they can. Yeah.
Well, this has been so insightful, Laura. Thank you so much. And looking forward to potentially working with you in the future.
Yeah, I do too, Vivi. It's nice talking to you. Thanks.
Bye.